Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to my latest book of the month reading vlog. If you are new to my channel, this is a series I do pretty regularly where I just read the book of the month books that I get every month or every other month. I am not sponsored by Book of the Month. I'm just a regular old member who really likes the service. I like staying on top of the books that I get so that I don't get a huge book of the month backlist piling up. And I also like to provide reviews on some of their more recent titles in a timely manner so that if any of you are Book of the Month members and you're considering reading these books next or adding them onto future boxes, I can help you decide if they are the books for you. Before I get into the books that I'm reading for this video, which I am very, very excited for, I want to set the stage about where my life is at right now. It's been crazy recently, and I do think I'm going to put out a video before this one that's going to be kind of a life recap, status update. So most of the information should be in that video, but in case you missed it, long story short, my family is moving. We're moving to another state about 7-8 hours away from us. And so our life has been and is going to continue to be very crazy for the next couple of months while we deal with selling our house, packing up our stuff, purchasing a new house, moving into that new house. There's a period of time where we will not have a house for about a month and all of the logistical challenges that come along with that. It's a good thing. I'm happy about the move. I'm excited, but it definitely is causing me to have to take a little bit of a step back from reading, producing content, etc. So hopefully that makes sense and is okay, but I still have books that I'm interested in and I want to keep reading, especially if I have audiobooks, which for all of these picks, I actually do have audiobooks available. So that should help me get through them a little bit quicker. So let's talk about the books that I will be reading in this video. The first one is my most recent book of the month pick. It was one of the April selections. It is Camp Zero by Michelle Min Sterling. I had not really heard of this book until my friend Gwen mentioned it from her channel Gwendolyn Kensinger. I believe she put this on one of her anticipated releases lists, and I heard her share that it was a sci-fi kind of dystopian book and didn't need to hear much else to be interested. Once I saw that this was a book of the month selection, I knew it was going to be my pick. The top of this book's synopsis says, in a near future northern settlement, the fates of a young woman, a professor, and a mysterious collective of climate researchers collide in this mesmerizing and transportive debut novel. I will say that I started this book, but at this point it's been weeks since I started it, so I am going to restart it for this video and read the whole thing in kind of one go. At that point when I started it, I didn't get very far in, but from the beginning it was a little confusing to me what the plot of this book is. It feels a little bit like Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which I do believe is one of the comp titles used to promote this book, which I wasn't a huge fan of, so we'll see how this book, I end up enjoying it. But the gist is that it's a futuristic kind of dystopian society where climate change has affected the world, and we're following a few different characters with different circumstances at this time. I'm not sure how they intersect. I'm not sure what the point is or if there is a point, but those are the vibes of this book and it intrigues me if nothing else, so excited to get into it. The next book I'll be reading for this video was my March pick, and it's a contemporary novel called Rootless by Zara Apaya. I have not seen anything about this book in terms of reviews or people really buzzing about it, but when it was one of the options for book of the month, I was struck by this cover. I think it is gorgeous, and reading the synopsis, it sounded like it might be up my alley. So it says, a provocative debut novel about a marriage in crisis that asks, can you ever be rooted in a home that's on the brink of collapse? I love hard-hitting contemporary books. I like reading about marriages and complex relationships in general, so hoping that this delivers on that. The thing that I am very bummed about this book is, if you can see it, there's a big scratch running along the center of the book. It came to me like that. I probably could reach out to Book of the Month and let them know. At this point, it's been a couple of months since I received it, so I probably should have reached out to Book of the Month right when it happened, and I'm sure they would have replaced it for me. Now it feels like it's too late, but we'll see how my enjoyment of this book goes. If I don't love it, I'll probably just get rid of it and not really think too much about it, but if I do love it, then I will probably reach out to them, see if they can replace it. If not, I may look into just replacing it myself so that I can have a nice pristine cover of it. But definitely excited to dive into this one and hopefully find somewhat of a hidden gem. And then the last book that I'll be reading is a backlist title that I added onto my March box because I have heard a few of my friends absolutely rave about this book and tell me I'm gonna love it, and I agree with them. I think I will. It's Take My Hand by Dolen Perkins Valdez. This is a historical fiction book. It was one of the monthly selections in May of 2022, so about a year ago at this point. The synopsis of this one says, a searing and compassionate new novel about a young Black nurse's shocking discovery and burning quest for justice in post-segregation Alabama, from the best-selling author of Wench. I have a hard time believing that I'm not going to enjoy this book, so it's time that I finally dive in and can be in on the hype. And yeah, overall, I think this is going to be a great video because I've got 3 different genres here and some pretty diverse book selections, which I'm happy about. Hoping I love them, but I will be honest with my thoughts either way. I am ready to start an audiobook today, and right at this moment, I think I'm being drawn to Rootless. So I think this is the audiobook I'm gonna pop on to start. I have some things to take care of around the house. I have errands to run, I need to buy groceries. So I will be listening to that while I do that today. I will come back and check in once I am a little bit in and have some initial thoughts. So I will talk to you in a bit. All right, the view probably looks kind of similar, though it is several hours later. I'm in the same room, but I am currently doing reading sprints on Kendall's channel. I'm really glad that I committed to do this several weeks ago because it is forcing me to do some reading tonight, which is good. I am 95 pages into Rootless, and so far I'm really enjoying it. This is giving me vibes of a combination between Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and I will explain why. But the general synopsis of this book is we're following this couple. In the very first chapter, we learn that they are a married couple, but the wife has left the husband for some reason, unbeknownst to us. And that first chapter is from the husband's perspective. His name is Sam and her name is Apaya. And she basically left the country with no communication, no note, no message, nothing. And he's not really sure why that happened. They have a child together, so pretty major event. But then chapter 2 is 19 years in the past. It's from the wife's perspective, and that's before they're married. It's basically the very beginning of them meeting and starting a relationship. And then each chapter after that is 1 year later. So I expect we're going to get the whole progression of the 19 years leading up to this first event. We're going to see their relationship develop, we're going to see them get married, and then I assume we're going to find out what it is that drove the wife to leave the husband and hopefully their resolution at the end of this. I'm not sure if this is classified as a romance or just a general contemporary, and that's really why I would compare it to both of these books. So Before I Let Go is one of my favorites. This is a second chance romance between a married couple who ends up getting a divorce. They went through something really tragic that drove them apart, and then they ultimately come together. So I'm hoping that this does that too, because then that would probably lead towards me enjoying it. But also it's reminding me of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow because this couple, at least in their early years that we're following, they're more of best friends to each other. And it's becoming clear that their relationship isn't just easy. They're in relationships with other people. It's never really the right time. And at this point of the book where I am now, it's 11 years before that first chapter. So I followed them for 8 years of knowing each other and they're still not fully together. So it's similar to this book, which is about these two characters who it's like never the right time. They have love for each other, but they never get to be in love with each other and have a relationship together. So this book is much more of just a general contemporary book than it is a romance. So I'm very interested to continue reading this book and to see what direction it ends up going. Before I Let Go, I gave 5 stars, and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow I gave 3 stars. So it could land somewhere in the middle. I'm hoping I really love it, but of course you never know. So I'm going to continue listening to it. I'm going to continue on these sprints tonight, hopefully make it a really good chunk of the way through, and I will probably come back tomorrow to give you an update, maybe once I've finished this book, but definitely once I have more thoughts to share on my opinion on it. But really happy to say that so far, so good. Hello friends, I am back with an update. I finished Rootless. I just finished it a few minutes ago, so my thoughts are very fresh and I have a lot of thoughts to work through when it comes to this book. This book is simultaneously a lot more than meets the eye when it comes to everything that it encompasses, but it's also the type of book where not a lot happens for most of it and we're covering a lot of time throughout these characters' lives, but not a lot of very specific plot points that I can really point to. So it was kind of a weird reading experience. I think I already gave a synopsis of this book that was pretty good in that we're following this married couple. The first chapter actually starts 5 months before some event that we don't know what it is. So starting part 1, we have May of 2016. Okay, come on pages. May of 2016, which is 5 months before. We don't know before what. And then after that first chapter, it jumps to September 1997, which is 19 years before. And then basically from this point, it continues going forwards in time where we're seeing the entire progression of these two characters' relationship. But I will say when starting this book, I didn't know what to expect genre-wise. I didn't know if this was primarily a romance. I did compare it to Before I Let Go. I do still see similarities in that this is talking about a married couple, but I want to put the disclaimer out there that this is definitely not a romance and it doesn't end with a happily ever after, which might be a spoiler, but I know that there are a lot of romance readers who need that. They need that confirmation that that's going to happen at the end of the book. That comforts them, and it could potentially be harmful to them to read a story that doesn't end like that. And I want to be clear that this doesn't. So with that, I want to continue comparing it to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, because this is also about two characters who we follow them for many, many years of their lives. It's kind of a will they, won't they type situation. Are they meant for each other? Are they not? Are they just meant to be friends? This one also doesn't end in a happily ever after. Very different plot-wise, and the characters themselves are pretty different and what they're struggling with, but it's very similar in that aspect, and also that both of these are overwhelmingly sad books. You're reading about characters really struggling, and not only struggling with what they're going through, but also struggling to figure out who can they rely on in their lives, who can they open up to, who can they trust, who do they want to have by their sides when they go through these difficult things. So in those ways, I still stand by this comparison. I also think this book felt similar to me to Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. I didn't like this book when I originally read it. I do wonder if I read it now, if I would have a different perspective, because I am becoming more and more of the mind that it is incredibly important to read books from perspectives other than your own. And that can be in multiple different ways. This is a contemporary book about a main character who is just kind of down on her luck and just trying to get herself into the groove of life and figure out who she is and what she wants. And she makes a lot of messy decisions. And it's just a book full of bad decisions, which at the time I read it was kind of annoying. I didn't like that I couldn't relate to her and that she was doing things that I didn't understand why she was doing them. This also does that, in that the characters in this relationship make decisions that are potentially questionable. And while that annoyed me in Queenie, I think I appreciated it in Rootless because it really made me work to empathize with these characters, to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and to kind of re-ingrain in myself that you don't know what's going on behind the scenes of other people's lives. The decisions that people make are the ones that they think are right for themselves and their families, and they don't need permission or acceptance from other people to make those decisions. It's their life at the end of the day. And to talk about some of the specific things that were outside of my realm of experience, first of all, the setting of this book. The main character, F.A., is originally from Ghana. At the time this book starts, she's living in the UK with her husband. They have a daughter. Within this book, she travels back to Ghana and gets back in touch with her family there. So both of those two settings are not familiar to me as someone who lived in the US. And I also think it's important to point out that the topic of abortion is covered in here. And it's very interesting reading a book about abortion, not about abortion, but including abortion, set not in the United States, because I am so US centric. I'm so tuned into what the US is doing with policies related to abortion, but that's not the topic in here. The topic in here is abortion is something that one of the characters wants to do, and ultimately it's their choice. And for me, that reaffirmed the fact that I am pro-choice. I think that women should have the choice to do whatever they want with their body when it comes to enduring a pregnancy. And even if this character is doing something that I wouldn't personally do, I can still respect that choice. And this is just one example of a set of circumstances that could lead a person to make that choice for themselves. But again, ultimately, it's not my business what other people's circumstances are. It's only important to me that people have the choice to do what is best for themselves, for their mental health, for their physical health, and that's it. So I think this is an important book in that regard, in that it doesn't matter what your stance is. You can read a story about a character who's in a completely different situation from you, who has a completely different set of circumstances from you, who may make a decision that would be different from the one you would make either in your life now or their life. But it just teaches empathy. You don't have to agree with this character. You don't have to like this character. You don't have to like this book. But I think it's important to be reading books that are outside of your set of experiences and use that to continue forming your own opinions. And yeah, this book also covers a lot about what it means to be a mother and the toll that being a mother takes on your body, on your mental health, on your career prospects, on your relationship with your spouse or partner, on your relationship with the rest of your family, and how it can be so difficult to regain your own sense of self separate from being a mother. And I really appreciated all of that commentary. I did also write down some other potential content warnings, cheating and child abandonment that happens in here. Again, it's decisions and situations that you might not agree with, but it's important to read. Now, all that being said, while I think this book is important, I'm struggling a little because I didn't necessarily enjoy my reading experience. And it kind of feels similar to me of how I felt reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, in that I can respect what the book was doing. And I can say I'm glad to have read it, but I also didn't particularly enjoy the reading experience. So I feel like that should lower the book's rating. Okay, camera died. Not sure exactly what I was saying, but I think I was saying that overall, I respect this book. I respect the conversations it had. I respect the internal kind of contemplation it forced me to have. I didn't particularly love the reading experience, and I didn't feel super connected to any of the characters in here, so I wasn't really rooting for anybody, and for me that's hard to rate a book highly when a book doesn't have that. So I'm gonna give it 3 stars. But I would like to use it to continue encouraging you to pick up books that are from perspectives and experiences that you do not share with the character or the author. Whether or not that's this book, I just think in general, I personally think that's an important thing to consciously do and encourage other people to do. So that is my kind of pitch. But yeah, I'm gonna give this one 3 stars. Next, I am going to go ahead and dive back into Camp Zero. I went ahead and started the audiobook over. I'm only like 5 minutes in, so I'll come back once I'm a good chunk back into this book and can give a really solid synopsis. And hopefully I can enjoy this kind of post-apocalyptic, sci-fi, almost dystopian type of book. All right, here with an update. I just finished Camp Zero, and I can't say that I actively disliked it, but I didn't like it. And let's see, let me formulate my thoughts a little bit. I do think the initial kind of pitch of this book being similar to Station 11 is accurate, though I don't know if people who loved Station 11 are going to also love this book. Because I think what people love about Station 11 is more of the specific kind of themes and like type of people that it follows. This one I think is slightly more scientific than Station 11 is, because that one has more of like a Shakespearean subplot and element within it, and that's definitely not what's happening in here. The similarity comes more from the initial premise and setup and kind of format of this book, which is that it's set in a futuristic society where climate change has kind of wrecked the US and the world in general. People are fleeing to Canada, and it's people kind of surviving in that post-apocalyptic setting, but again, in a little bit more of a scientific way. The characters in this book, it took me a long time to really get rooted in who each of the characters were and what their situations were. Two of the female characters specifically sounded really similar in voice and just their situations and the way they read as characters. I got them pretty confused. And then there was a male perspective, Grant, who was much easier to keep straight. But the pacing of this book is quite slow. I think you have to know that going in. And the plot, I don't want to say there's no plot, because there is. It just takes a long time for you to figure out what it is and what each perspective's intention is, or like what their goal is. So for me, the last like third of the book was the most interesting after all the setup was done, and once we really got into like, okay, what is everyone trying to do here? What's the reason they're all in the situations that they are? We do get a lot of the backstory about what brought everyone to their current situations. And I think that's important. It's just much slower to read through all of that than to get into the meat of like, what is the actual goal here? But by the very end, I just wasn't very invested in what was happening. It's an interesting premise, an interesting idea. I just needed it to be a little bit quicker to the point. I needed the characters to be a little bit more intriguing to me so I could really get invested in their stories and be rooting for them. I think I'm going to give it 2 stars, and I'm going to say if you did like Station 11 and are interested in a little bit more scientific, a little bit more feminist of a premise, then you may enjoy this. But if you like high action, fast paced sci-fi books, I don't think this is quite that. I did listen to the audio of this through the Book of the Month app as well, and the audiobook I thought was fine. I didn't really have any positive or negative opinions on the narrators or anything like that. The Book of the Month interface for listening to audiobooks I thought was good. It does only go to 2 times speed though, so if you are someone who likes to listen to audiobooks faster than 2 times speed, especially if you're reading along with the text, just know that. For me, the 2 times speed was good as long as I wasn't also reading it physically. Since I was mostly listening to it while doing other things, it was a good speed to be able to keep up with it. But typically, if I'm also going to be reading along with the physical book, I like it to go a little bit faster. So just adding that as a note for anyone who might be interested in using the Book of the Month app for audiobooks. So now it is time to get into the third and final book for this video, Take My Hand. This is the one I have the highest expectations for. I would be shocked if I don't end up loving this one, but we will see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and pop this audiobook on. I think I had to get this one through Audible or Libro, but as you can see behind me, the packing is well underway, which is perfect for listening to an audiobook while doing, so it shouldn't be too long until I am back with my final update for this video so I can give my final thoughts on the last book and recap my thoughts as a whole. Okay, yes, I am sitting on the floor and I'm going to have to continue getting creative with where I sit when it comes to vlog clips as my house gets more and more empty. But checking in because I finished Take My Hand. And when I tell you I flew through this book, and not just because I've had a lot of opportunities lately to listen to audiobooks. I was so captivated by this book, which is not always typical of me reading historical fiction. I do enjoy a lot of historical fiction and I think it's important to read. Usually by the end of a book, I will appreciate the story even if it's slower. But this one I was completely eating up and not wanting it to end or slow down or anything. Like, it had me way more on the edge of my seat than historical fictions typically do. And when I explain what it's about, it probably won't sound like anything that interesting, but it was. And it was so different from historical fictions that I've read before, and yet I will compare it to a couple of things, but wow, what a ride. Okay, so this book takes place in Alabama in 1973. And that reminds me, I was going to look up some particular notable dates. Okay, yes. So this book, first of all, takes place in 1973, which in January of 1973, Roe v. Wade was passed. Or the Roe v. Wade court case happened, in which the decision ruled that women should have access to abortions in the United States. What is very interesting about the publishing of this book, it came out, I think, in May of 2022, and in June of 2022, Roe v. Wade was overturned. So there's that. I believe that this author intended to write this book assuming that the reader would have more rights than the characters of this book do, which is horrifically debatable. But anyway, that's not even really the point of this book. But this is set in 1973, and we're following our main character, who is a Black nurse at this family planning clinic, and a big part of her job is administering birth control to patients. And this was a time when a lot of birth control was experimental. They didn't have a ton of testing or research or data on the long-term effects of these birth control tactics. It was very interesting reading about the focus on the depot shot in this book, knowing how popular and prevalent that is now as birth control. But then what happens is this nurse finds out that this clinic and the doctors and nurses around her were complicit in this situation happening of two sisters, really young, 11 and 13 years old, being sterilized against their will, and their sterilization essentially being treated as a form of birth control, but is obviously irreversible and was done to them at ages where they couldn't consent. And I didn't even know that non-consenting sterilization was a fear that I had to have as a woman, but here I am. And it's not a laughing matter, because this book shows just how horrific that is. In the author's note at the end, she talks about how this is based on a real situation, a real court case that ends up happening, and there is a court case that happens within this book that mirrors what happened in real life, or that she pulled inspiration from real life. So not only was that situation super compelling to read about, this main character I really enjoyed, but the court case and how that played out was so interesting to hear. It really reminded me of Jodi Picoult's writing, who I've only read a few books by her, but I know that she often includes court cases and court scenes in her books. I find that very interesting. I know nothing about court proceedings in my daily life or anything, but I find it a very interesting way to watch situations play out and watch justice kind of be served or potentially not served, and just in the discussion of the morality of this type of situation, which again is not something that ever really crossed my mind as something that people would consider doing to another human being. So I really, really enjoyed this. I would compare this to The House of Eve by Sadiqa Johnson, which I just recently read for an Aardvark reading blog actually. It's also a historical fiction, but that has to do more with motherhood and with the choice to become a mother, the desire to become a mother, and what can happen if you either do or don't want to become a mother, but that isn't the cards that are dealt for you. So different but similar in that it's about women's reproductive rights. I would highly recommend this book, and I really thank my friends who have encouraged me to pick this one up because I knew I would love it. Lena from Lena's Bookshelf and Kelsey from Essentially Booked. They were completely right, and if it sounds even remotely up your alley, I 100% recommend it. So with that, very interesting results to come out of this video. 3 very different books and 3 very different ratings. Camp Zero, I'm sticking with my 2-star rating. Really didn't enjoy it, and I think this slow post-apocalyptic type sci-fi book is just not for me. So hopefully I'll be able to identify those going forward and kind of steer clear of them. Rootless, after ruminating with this book a little bit longer, I think I'm actually gonna bump it up to 4 stars because I think the importance of it and the impact that it's had on me has kind of overtaken the mediocre reading experience of it. I really do appreciate that I read this book. So we're gonna bump it up to 4 stars. And then my favorite of the video, Take My Hand, the historical fiction that I will definitely be recommending from here on out because it is just so different from historical fictions that I've read before, and yet I enjoyed every bit as much as I was expecting to based on its content. It does look like she has 2 other books, so I will definitely be putting those onto my TBR, keeping them on my radar, and hopefully reading them in the somewhat near future. So with that, let me know if you have read any of the books that I read in this video and what your thoughts were on them. Even if you disagree with me, I would love to hear your thoughts and have a discussion about them. If you have not read them yet, let me know if I inspired you to pick any of them up. And other than that, I don't have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.